Our orchids have been learning to skydive. Well, this one was trying to anyway. We've had some terrible windstorms. Even our giant bamboo there has taken a bit of a knock from it. And this was blown 3.5 meters off the edge of our deck. It needs an emergency repot. And the wonderful thing about epidendrums is there's some secrets to their media that is going to allow you to fix this really quickly without a problem, saving a lot of money and being able to do it immediately without having to worry running to the shop to go get some more media. Let's have a look and see what we need to do. Yeah. Looking at the plant itself, it's really not damaged at all. It survived really well, but we do have a lot of these kikis off the tops of the plant, and I like to keep my epidendrums quite neat and tidy. And this is just starting to get to that point where it needs to be renovated anyway, so we'll do that all at the same point. We are going to lose some of the flower display off of this as we do it, but we don't have to remove the flowers when repotting these epidendrums because they are such hardy plants. They're not going to even basically blink that they've been repotted. What we're going to do is just check in through the base. Oopsie. We can see all this old media, everything. We actually really don't have to do terribly much to it. We can remove some of these old roots. We're not actually going to fiddle around there too much. Everything seems fine. There's a little bit of old root, dead volume, but that's not going to really matter too much with these plants. So we can basically just get our mix ready and then pot this up and fill it in. And what are we going to do about our mix? The amazing thing about repotting these epidendrums is the media I use. This is basically the little secret elements. It's the little stones that I use, it's that coarse river sand, and then of course I use bark and potting media. So what that gives me is a media that has quite a large content of inorganic media. That river sand and those stones are not going to decompose in any way, and with the potting media and the bark, what's going to happen is those will just decompose together, and if my media is still loose and friable, then I have no problems. I can just reuse it. A lot of that bark media that I used would have decomposed finely, and the organic parts of the media will just degrade into humus, so it's actually going to help feed the plant anyway. So with all this inorganic media, that's not going to go anywhere. And as I said, as long as your media is not beginning to compact or coalesce into clumps, it's still fine to reuse. So this is going to give you a large amount of reusable content or media for your orchid. So it means you're not really going to have to spend much money unless you're potting it up into a bigger size pot. But this, again, I'm just going to be repotting it back into the same size pot that it originally came from. The stones that I'm using are giving it some weight to the pot because we do have such tall plants, and as already is proof, it got blown over in the wind. We need something heavy at the bottom. So this is what I'm going to use. To get that extra weight, I'm going to be using these old broken shards of old pots that also happen to be blown over at some point or other during our lifespan. This wasn't all the damage done from this past storm, windstorm, but it's part of the story of our growing orchid, so we may as well keep it involved. Instead of just throwing this away, we can use this as not only as a good drainage media for the bottom of the pot, but also to give that extra weight that we're going to need for this pot so this can stop blowing over. Ba-bam! Ow! Okay, please be careful with shards of pottery. They can be quite sharp. Okay, so there we go. It's about 1/3 of the pot, perhaps a little less, 1/4. It's just to give that weight to the bottom. What is going to happen is slowly the river sand and that will settle in through it, but it's still going to allow for that extra air movement and the extra drainage. So that's all an extra added bonus other than just adding the weight to the pot. So now that we're going to be reusing this media, all I need to add now, instead of having to add in river sand and potting soil and everything else, all I need to add in now is bark, because this has got all that inorganic media in it already, and it's just missing the organic component. Although it does have that humus in it, it's just missing the bark. And the reason I add the bark is because our media is relatively fine. What the bark does, it produces larger pieces inside the mix, which is going to allow for better drainage. It's going to allow for better air movement. It will provide a different structure in the media itself that is going to be better for the orchid overall. So there we go. I'm going to be adding the bark, and the also nice thing about adding bark to this media is you don't really have to worry about the size of the bark that you're using. Even if your bark is in all different sizes like this, you don't have to try and grade it like you will have to with some of your other orchids. You can just use those large chunks, and if you get those finer pieces into, it's not going to be a problem. And the amount of bark that I'm adding, it's approximately 1/3. And also by using these terracotta shards at the bottom that's giving me the weight to the pot, this allows me a slightly larger percentage of bark to my mix, because it will make the mix lighter as opposed to using more river sand and more stone. So this is going to actually allow for better air movement through the media than would have otherwise been possible, and that's always going to be good for your orchid. And now comes for the easy part. Basically, just adding your mix to your pot. Already we can see how much root volume here, so we're not going to be filling our pot all the way, because then this will just sit on top. So we'll fill our pot approximately halfway. Give it a little bit of a shake. This is going to help settle some of that sand and those little stones and some of the bark in between those old pot shards, so that when you water, you're not going to cause sinkage in your pot, and then you're going to have to start refilling your pot with media again. So you want to try and settle it in as much as possible before you get your orchid in. You're going to get some of the loose sand coming out from the bottom, but that's okay. And there we go. Now all we've got to do is settle in our media in through the roots as we go around filling it up. And then once I've done that, I'll show you how we're going to sort out and neaten up the top a bit. And oopsie, I forgot. Let's just take that back out again. Another thing I like to use on my epidendrums is bone meal. I don't have direct access to bone meal any longer since we closed down the nursery, but we do have these organic pellets. This is a slow release organic pellet that does have bone meal in it. So what I'm going to do is use some of this instead. Just sprinkle a couple of small handfuls in and around inside underneath where I'm going to be potting this orchid. Even if you'd like to, you can sprinkle on a little bit of media over the top of them if you want, but really these slow release pellets aren't going to burn the roots of your orchid. And there we go. And then we'll just go in and get some of that media into the sides of the orchid. You can try and avoid some of the bigger bark chunks if you don't have too much space. This will help settle the orchid down nicely. Notice also I haven't done any compacting of the media, because we all know orchids don't like a highly compacted media. So rather just let it settle down by itself, just with a little bit of shaking. And people have been asking me, how do I keep my epidendrums so upright and basically contained, because theirs tend to run out all over the show. There's a few little tricks to doing it, and it's really not difficult to do. Okay, let's just give that a good shake. And we'll just go through, see where it's settled in, and fill it back up to the right level. And there we go, that's just about done. And that is as easy as it is to repot your epidendrum, and you spent hardly any money at all. Just a little bit of bark. Now, keeping our epidendrums upright, what we do is, one of the most important things is put it out in the full sun. That's going to actually make it grow more compactly than it would otherwise if it's getting a lot of shade. The more shade it is, the longer and lankier they tend to grow, the bigger the space between the leaves, and you land up with something that climbs and creeps all over the show. Out in the full sun, you can see they actually stay a lot more compact. They don't get quite as tall as they would if they are in the shadier position, but they produce more flowers. Then, of course, what you need to do is, as your flower spikes have finished flowering and they start getting kikis and the roots are long enough, you can just clip those off. These stems are really brittle anyway, so they'll often break off by themselves if you knock them around a bit. So they're quite easy just to pull off, or you can just get a pair of secateurs and cut them off nicely. Yeah, even these little kikis that have little flower spikes on them, you could always wait until they flower and then remove them. But remember, this is always going to be in flower. If you've got it planted out in the full sun and your environment is right, you're going to have flowers the whole year. To keep your plant nice and compact, to get all that bushy flowering, the more often you trim off these kikis, the more compact your plant is going to be, and the more flowers you'll get on a single bush, if you want to call it a bush. Any of these wayward stems, we can just click off. What happens here off these old stems is, once all the leaves have died off, if it doesn't produce any more kikis, we wait for it to brown off, and then we just snap or cut it off right at the base. Another thing you can do, especially if your plant is a young plant, it hasn't filled out yet, you can just take these kikis and push them down into the center of the plant and allow for those roots to root themselves into the media. And that will give you a much bushier plant a lot faster. And if you have these old canes that have a kiki just at the end and the whole cane is dead, or not dead, still alive, but you can just remove it down at the base. And there we go. Some of these smaller kikis, if they've still got some nice flowers on, I may leave them for a while. And if they don't have enough root volume, I'll leave them until they do. And it's as simple as that. And now you have a whole lot more kikis to make up another pot and start all over again and have another great big display like this. So orchids that try and skydive doesn't have to be a traumatic affair. It can be turned into something positive and easy to do. And also just a few little tips and tricks with these epidendrums. They also grow extremely well with that Darjeeling mix that we use with our cymbidiums, because of all that leaf litter is what they would grow in naturally in their environment. But because I don't like to repot mine too often, some of my epidendrums in these pots have been in the pots for probably 8 or 10 years now already, And that's mostly because I use all of that inorganic media, those small stones and that river sand, that allows for less sinkage of the media. So the media is not going to sink away in the pot, and it allows that media to last for a very long time. But it's just when accidents like this happen that we need to get in and fix it all up again. And even though in the windstorm we had our own share of drama, we also had a windfall. And you wonder why I'm getting so excited about a few little sticks. These are things that we found in the park that got blown out of the trees. And just as we were walking by, we happened to notice something special on them. These little white flowers. This is Mr. Venosum, one of our little South African indigenous orchids that just grows wild in and around our area. And all of these broken branches had lots of these little babies on them. These are going to be put up against our logs at the back so that they can carry on growing. We won't even remove them from the sticks that they're on. We'll just apply them onto our railway sleepers that we have, and they'll just carry on growing. They won't even know that they've moved. We're in exactly the same climate. We're just a few hundred meters away from where we found them. And if you'd like us to do a full video on Mr. Venosum, drop it in the comments box below and we'll be sure to get to it if there's enough people interested. Even the most tiniest impossible little piece of orchid, and it still wants to flower. And if you're unsure what's going to be the best media for your poor man's orchid or these epidendrums, just drop a comment in the box below. I'll see if I can help you out. Otherwise, go check out that Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box down below. Ed posts up a lot of orchid related content there all the time that is freely available for everyone. And when you're down there, feel free, sign up, become a member, and grow like a pro. And thank you for watching. If you have found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.